Professor Oster, I have to say that I personally have read both your books, and I'm a huge fan.
Thank
Had your
you.
books, yes, had your books been written 20 years earlier when my firstborn was born, it would have relieved considerable anxiety and answered so many
Yeah.
questions that I would have had. What I really like about your books is that it's data driven. I know that that is the emphasis of your book, but I find that data driven information provides an objective and balanced um, opinion information, just arming parents in a non-judgmental way with perspectives to help them reach the right decisions for their family. And I know that that's your big emphasis. You know, whatever's
Okay.
right for your family is right for you, and don't worry about what everyone else is doing. So I love that.
We know her. Do you remember?
Thanks.
We hung out with her a couple times.
I find that I find that new parents are already drowning in a sea of guilt and judgment from other parents. So I feel that your book, it gives us tools to remedy this. So thank you.
Thank you.
I'm the moderator today, and I wanted to give you a quick rundown of the agenda. Each member that is joining will be given an opportunity to ask your question. We will actually, Lisa Ryers, who is the president of the Brown Club, will unmute you and spotlight you to give you a chance to ask your question. And I apologize because of in advance for time constraint reasons that you'll be cut off after a 5-minute question and answer time per person. I just want to be respectful of everyone's time. I also want to put a plug into all our members to say, if you have an idea for a social club gathering idea, please reach out to me or Lisa so we can help you organize. So Emily, I'm just gonna give you a time to present right now. You'll have a 30-minute presentation time, and then we're gonna follow up with questions from our participants, our audience.
Okay, so I should be clear. I'm definitely not going to take 30 minutes, but I wanted to give you a little bit of sort of background, tell you a little bit about what I do at Brown. Maybe I'll show you a few slides that I think kind of motivate some of what I've tried to do in Cribsheet, and then we can talk about whatever you want. So I am a professor at Brown. I've been at Brown since 2014. Before that, I was at the University of Chicago. And I have, you know, so I'm sort of like a regular professor of economics, but I have a lot of hats. I've been acquiring more hats recently. I currently, so I do sort of regular, like, you know, I teach a class on statistical methods to graduate students. I teach a new undergraduate manner to our undergraduates, which is about the economics of social policy. And I do research, not as much as I would like, but I do research about health and health decisions, and how we can think about the kinds of health choices that people make. But I also do a lot of other stuff at Brown these days. So I'm the vice chair of the Tenure and Promotions Committee, which probably doesn't mean that much to people who are undergrads, but is like the committee that reviews tenure cases at the university. And I sit on a lot of other like random committees, I guess. And at the moment, I am also the co-chair of the Brown Healthy Reopen Task Force, which is the task force that is in charge of figuring out how we can safely bring our students back to campus in the fall, because that's really, really important to all of us. And what else do I do? Oh, okay, so that's all the stuff I do at Brown. And I really, really love Brown. I'm like, you know, I came from Chicago, and I just like, I'm bought in. I drank Kool-Aid, and I really love, I'm a huge fan of everyone we have here, and of the values of the place. I think it's the people that it cares about the most. And I think at Brown, it's pretty clear that the people we care about the most are the undergrads. And I think that is reflected in how great our undergrads are, and how, you know, just how like thoughtful and brave and excited they are. And actually, among the many things about this pandemic that have been just awful, the one you know, the one piece of my job that makes me the saddest is that I like love teaching this new class, and I have these juniors and seniors, and now I just get to see them online, and it makes me sad. But I'm here to talk about the like yet third part of my professional life, which is that I write these books about pregnancy and parenting, and I wrote the first one almost 10 years ago now, when I was pregnant with my daughter, and then when she was a baby, and she's now just turned 9. And then I wrote the second one when my son was a little smaller, and it came out last year. So I wanted to talk a little bit about Cribsheet. I'm just going to share my screen. So this is the cover of, it's actually the cover of the hardcover. The paperback just came out last week. I'm very excited. And so the kind of idea behind this book is to take the approach I took in Expecting Better, the first book, which is really about, you know, using data to make better decisions in pregnancy, and turn that to early parenting, and ask, you know, what does the evidence really say about the kinds of questions that, you know, parents would typically ask, or often ask. So I often motivate this for those of you who have small children by saying, you know, imagine that you're in bed, and you've just finished, you know, feeding your 3-week-old baby, and he's kind of like fallen asleep, and you're holding him, and he's asleep, and you're very, 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 very tired. And you know, like if you just kind of slinch him over a little bit next to you, and you like, he will stay asleep and you will stay asleep, and like you will get some sleep, and like that will be so nice. But you know, you kind of know you're supposed to like take him and put him in the bassinet next to your bed, but also you know your baby, and you know when you do that, he's gonna like lay there for 14 seconds, and then he's gonna wake up. And so the question is like, oh, is it okay if I just like kind of smooch him over here, and then I let him go to sleep? And so you know, it's kind of like 3 o'clock in the morning. Like where are you gonna learn about that? The internet. So you get on your phone, and you know, you get into like the chat groups, you just Google it, whatever, and you kind of get two opposing views. So there's this sort of set of people who are like, yes, definitely move the baby over and like sleep next to the baby. That's what millions of years people have been doing that. In fact, it's actually, if you don't do that, your baby will never love you, because that's how you stay attached to them. And then there's the other people. You say, if you do that, if you sleep in the bed with your baby, it will die for sure. Do you want that? Is that what you want? Do you not love your baby? Because it will for sure. And of course, neither of those things is true. You can not sleep with your baby, and it can still love you. And maybe there is some risk, but it is not like of the magnitude that the internet would have you believe. And so I think this book is really about sort of digging into those kind of data and about questions like that, and asking, you know, what is the evidence that we really have to make those choices, and how can we combine that evidence with preferences and with the constraints we face, and with the different kind of choices that parents are gonna make. So one of the topics that I spend sort of the most time a lot of the book on is the question of breastfeeding. There's a lot of pieces of the evidence on breastfeeding, but I want to talk about one of them, which is the question of whether breast milk is magic. So certainly, if you kind of read the world literature on breastfeeding, or the rhetoric, you would be forgiven for believing that it is magic. So I sort of put together this list. Initially, it was just like a long list, but then we had to put it in there were so many things on the list, we had to put it in little bins. And so, you know, people will tell you that there are short-term benefits for your baby, fewer colds and infections, rashes, gastrointestinal disorders, lower risk of some very serious complications, that there are long-term child health benefits. This gets a lot of attention. It's going to make your kid healthier, smarter. They're going to have all kinds of fewer diseases. You know, they have higher IQ. That's really good for you. It's free birth control. You're going to be skinny. Your baby will love you more. You'll be very rich. No stress. Your friends will like you. Like all kinds of great stuff. Also, it's good for the world because there's methane in business, and the cows, it's very bad with the cows. And so you kind of like read this, and you get the impression it's sort of like you have to breastfeed. Like breastfeeding, it's the best. Don't you want to give your baby the best start? You don't care about the baby because it's the best. It's the best. Okay. And so, you know, you want to ask the question, like, why would we have the impression? Like, where would this evidence come from? How good is this evidence? Are we really sure? Like, are all of these pieces of things like really supported by the best evidence, or maybe some of them not so much? So I dig into a lot of this in the book, but I want to talk just about kind of where we see the evidence on something like higher IQ. And so I want to start by by sort of talking about some of the kinds of literature that you will see about breastfeeding. So for example, there is a study of about 300 people in Sweden that gets cited a lot in this literature. And what they do in that study is that they compare IQ scores for babies who are breastfed more or less. So it's in Sweden, so everybody's breastfed a little bit, but they compare like infants, kids who were breastfed for more than 6 months to kids who are breastfed for less than 3 months. And they look at whether the IQ scores are higher in one group than the other. And in that particular study, they find that that kids who are breastfed have like IQ scores that are like 8 points higher than the non-breastfed kids. So that's a huge effect. 8 IQ points is very, very, very big. And so, but then of course, when you look into the data, you realize that that there are other differences between the kids who are breastfed more and kids who are breastfed less. In particular, there are demographic differences in their moms. So the moms who breastfeed more, even in that study, even in Sweden, they're more educated, they're richer, they have other advantages. And so you have to sort of wonder, well, is it those things, or is it the breastfeeding that's kind of really mattering? And when the researchers take that into account, when they adjust for that, when they try to hold constant these other characteristics of the families, they find that the effect is much smaller. But in that particular case, it's still there. And so a very common thing you'll see people say in these kind of papers is, well, sure, we think there are differences, but don't worry, we adjusted for them, we used a regression, and so it should be fine. The problem is, it's not clear that they adjust for everything, right? So a study like that, maybe they see 2 categories of mom's education. They see, did she graduate from high school or not? But actually, there's a lot more nuance inside mom's education and whether you graduate from high school or not. And if the other things, the things you don't see, if they also are related to breastfeeding and related to child's IQ, the true effect could still be even smaller than what you see. So if that was all the evidence we had, we would be in a place where we just have to sort of argue about it. Like I would say, look, I think there's like a lot of other stuff that you haven't seen about the moms that you can't adjust for. And somebody else could be like, well, I don't think that those things are important. So, we're kind of at 6 and 7. But fortunately, there are better studies where we can do a better job adjusting. So let me give you one example, which is a study now of about 3,000 kids in the US using some data from the National Longitudinal Survey of Youth. In this study, the researchers see the same kinds of material, the same kinds of information that they see in the Sweden study. So they see kids, they see some measure of their breastfeeding, they see some measure of their IQ when they're older, some test scores. But they also see 2 other things. One is they see an IQ measure for the mom. So they don't just see her education, her income, they also see her performance on the same kind of IQ test. And the second thing is that they see multiple kids in the same family. So now they will see breastfeeding and IQ scores for 2 kids with the same mom. You can sort of see why that would be useful, because it would let you ask, well, there's a kid that's breastfed, there's a kid that's not, they have the same mom. I'm holding them up, literally the same mom. And so all these things I'm worried about, well, what if there's this difference? It's the same mom. And so that is going to address a lot of our concerns about confounding. So in that study, and I actually put up some numbers here. So in that study, when they just look at the very basic comparison between kids who are breastfed and kids who are not, it looks like there's about a 4.5 IQ point difference. That's very similar to what most other people have seen. When they adjust for basic demographics of the mom, some just like basic characteristics like education and income of the mother, that effect is way smaller. It's more like 1.5 points. When they then add in adjustments for IQ, that effect goes from 1.5 points to 0.5 point. So clearly there's something that's being explained by IQ, but there's still an effect there. But then when they adjust for the differences within family, when they look at 2 siblings, breastfed, not breastfed, same mom, the effect is 0.02 IQ points. 0.02 IQ points is 0. Okay, that's like 0. And so what that says, and when we sort of put this together and then we think about it in light of the other literature, what it says is that, these guys, they're able to replicate almost exactly what the other literature finds, except the existing literature, this sort of basic stuff, which is kind of comparing the two groups, it really stops after the first 2 bars. So what other people have been able to do is they can produce the first 2 bars, but then they don't have the second 2 bars. And so they say, well, it's probably the size of that second bar, the 1.5 bar. Well, no, the difference between those studies and this study is just that if you could adjust for more things, if you could control better, if you could adjust better for differences across families, you would not see an effect. So in the case of breastfeeding, I talk about these kind of issues, this sort of confounding, residual confounding, omitted variable bias, comes by a lot of different names. But the basic idea is very hard to learn about the effects of breastfeeding by just comparing kids who are breastfed to kids who are not, because there's tons of other differences across families. And so, I sort of do this I take this kind of approach, and I try to really isolate, like, what are the really good studies? Like, when sometimes we do have a randomized trial. Randomized trials are great. If we have a randomized trial, we use it. Sometimes we are able to compare siblings. That's super helpful. We can do things like this. That's really great. We can do this for obesity. We can do it for IQ. So there are some pieces where we can learn more. And we kind of dig in. We ask the question, of the things in this I put up this like huge list of the things in this list, when we really dig into the best data, like, which of them actually maintain? Where does the list end up? And here's the list. So it's not that there's no benefit to breastfeeding. I think this is something I was try to be very clear about when I talk about the book. It's not that I'm suggesting that somehow there's nothing. So it looks like there are some short-term health benefits to infants. And it looks like there actually are some longer-term health benefits to mom, particularly in the form of a lower risk of breast cancer. And there is a thing about methane. But a lot of the stuff that people emphasize, a lot of the kind of like guilt-inducing rhetoric that you get around this is really around these like long-term benefits for the kids, is really around people saying like, oh, like, this is you're gonna be with your kid for its whole life. If you think about like what makes moms in particular feel bad if breastfeeding doesn't work, which by the way doesn't for everybody, what makes people feel bad? It's not that people are saying, well, don't you feel bad that your kid is going to get 2 more allergic reactions in expectation in the first year? Like, that's not what people are thinking. They're thinking, your kids, this is like 3 IQ points, right? I talked to some woman whose whose doctor told her, like, if you quit breastfeeding, you're costing your kids 3 IQ points. What kind of thing is that to say to a person? I mean, it's not supported in the data. It is mean. And so I think we really, like, a lot of the argument I try to make here, particularly around breastfeeding, but also extending to a lot of the other pieces of this, is just that, I think we need to be realistic with people about, there are some things where there are some benefits, but also there are a lot of things in this space where the benefits, even if they're there, they're pretty small. And it is easy to imagine that other considerations might outweigh them. So there might be reasons that you don't want to breastfeed, or that it does not work for you. And that is fine. And the benefits are there, but they are small. They are not this like insane thing. And you should know what they really are before you make that choice, right? So there are going to be some things where the benefits are pretty big. And so maybe there you'd say, well, even though this isn't something that I like necessarily want to do, the benefits are so large, I'm gonna do it. But there's a lot of stuff in this space where like many choices are good choices, and we want to be a little careful about how strongly we state the importance of any one choice. So I'm going to open it up for questions, but I just want to end. I usually like to end this talk by ending with the same way that I end the book, because I think it sort of encapsulates in some ways the whole message of the book. And it's also something I've been thinking a lot about lately. So this is a story about bees. So in case it's not sort of obvious from my approach to parenting, I'm like an extremely neurotic parent, and I spend a tremendous amount of time like worrying about very minor things and major things. I mean, everything. I'm an equal opportunity warrior. And so so when Penelope, my daughter, was just about 2, we were going to go for the summer. We were going on vacation to this place it's a place in France we had been before, and it has a lot of bees. So, and it's like not always, but sometimes when we go there are a lot of bees. They like build nests under the tables, and so I became very anxious about this. So like somehow maybe she's allergic to bees. She'd never been stung by a bee. So we arrive at the doctor for like a 2-year-old well visit, and I have my like usual checklist of like 43 different questions to ask Dr. Lee. So I get to the bees, and Dr. Lee we're going on this vacation and there's a lot of bees and she's never been stung. I'm very worried that she's gonna be stung. She's going to anaphylactic shock, kind of isolated. We can't really get to the hospital. I don't really know where the hospital is. And so, you know, I'm trying to think about solutions. I've like brainstormed solutions. So I'm thinking about solutions. So we can test her for a bee allergy now. Like, we should do that. Maybe she should give us an EpiPen. We'll take the EpiPen. Like, you know, it was like kind of, and she's sort of like, I say, finish my whole spiel. Okay, what are we going to do? What is it? Like, let's make a plan. She's like, hi, you know, I just try not to think about that. And I was like, okay, yeah, that's it. And you know, in the moment it was like, yeah, trying to think about that. Like, you can't think about everything. You can't like be like an obsessive crazy person about all of the like tiny little things. And so, you know, I do sort of think about that a lot. We're trying not to think about it, and sort of trying in my parenting to say, you know, is this something big? Is this like a big thing, or is this a bees? And sometimes it is bees. All right, so let me stop there. I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm very happy to answer questions that people have or just chat. I've been writing a lot about the coronavirus lately. I have a newsletter, so I have to answer questions about the coronavirus. I don't know. What do you guys want to talk about?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Oster. I see that Alice needs to leave at 5:30, so I'm wondering if I should just give her an opportunity to ask her first question, if she has one.
Yeah, hello, Emily. Thank you very much for this presentation.
Hi.
I am actually a very new mom. I have been pumping
Nice.
as I speak.
Good times.
And I actually am coming from a bit of a different perspective because I found that when I gave birth, I found out that my son has a very rare genetic condition. And all of those plans went completely out the window. And so many things, for example, breastfeeding was like, this is not, we can't even think about this anymore. So I can say from personal experience that at the same time that I as well am a very data-driven person and I want to gather all the information, in that case, it actually became a bit of a stumbling block afterwards because I was like, you know, breastfeeding maybe is beneficial if you can do it. There are some benefits, but for many reasons you can't. So I actually am thankfully pumping exclusively. So my baby is drinking breast milk. Actually, you can see him right now.
Baby.
So he has a syndrome where he has a tracheostomy that helps him breathe for now. So he breathes through his neck. So like, you know, we're always looking at this pulse oximeter. Like when you talk about, like, you can worry about all the little things. It's like he literally might stop breathing at any moment. So it's pretty terrifying. So then you think about like, okay, well, what are the important things? But I was wondering for you, after this digression, if any of the studies you looked at pumping versus feeding at the breast, and if there's a way to deconvolve like that kind of maybe bonding variable versus the actual nutrition.
Yeah, I mean, no is the short answer. So we sort of barely have reasonable evidence on breastfeeding at all versus not. And even in these things where they sort of look at this, it's really like asking people like, did you breastfeed? And that's relying on people. Like if you want to think about would that, like, does that extend to pumping? Well, actually depends a little bit whether people would put pumping in the, but like if you were asked, are you breastfeeding, would you say yes or no? And I think part of the issue is some people would say yes, some people would say yes, some people would say no. I don't, you know, and so, but in general, I have been surprised at how little evidence, how little data that we're even collecting on it. So at some point I looked just for data on like how much, forget about like trying to link it to outcomes, just looking at how common it is for people to exclusively pump or mix, like how people think about mixing pumping and even though I think for many of us that's like a huge piece of this, there's just almost no data. Even in these like data sets like the PRAMs, it's only very recently that they've asked, which is like a nationally representative data set about new moms. It's only recently they've started asking about pumping at all. So we just have the data on this is just really, really poor. I mean, I will say there's no reason to think that pumping and breastfeeding would be any different. There's like certainly nothing in the and there's plenty of ways to cuddle your baby that involve. I mean, that involve. I presume some of them are holding. So there's no reason to think it would be any different or any, but it's just not something we know.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I'll let others ask their questions.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you, Alice. Yeah, congratulations. Thanks for showing us your baby. We actually have a lot of time because I think we only have 8 people asking questions. So I'm gonna try to figure out who's here and go in the order of your signups. So Abhas, would you like to ask? I don't know, I hope I said your name right, but
Abbas, yeah.
Abbas, okay.
Thank you, Karen. Emily, I'm a really big fan. I've been following your career from 538 onwards. I was really happy to see you come to Brown. And it's like your book is like the gift I give every new mother. You know,
Thanks.
so that's great. I wanted to see I feel like this kind of segues a little bit into coronavirus too, but you're basically fighting a logic versus culture war, right? And so what kind of response do you get? And if you, we don't have to do this immediately, but if you can segue into coronavirus, because I feel like that's evolving into a cultural war as well, as opposed to a logic and rational war too. So I'd love to.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's sort of my experience in the books has been kind of interesting. So when so when Expecting Better came out, I got really, I got a lot of, I get a lot of pushback, particularly around the alcohol stuff and the idea you can have a drink, which I totally think I can maintain that's where the evidence is. And but it was sort of, when I look back on that, I think boy, I could have anticipated that better or dealt with whatever. There's ways we could have, I could have done it differently. And so I felt there I got really trapped in the middle of some kind of sort of crazy, I don't even know how to describe who was on the warring of that. When Crib Sheet came out, I think, part of what was helpful was I think that the kind of central tension in the Crib Sheet is sort of between you and society, right? It's sort of you and the other people who are telling you that you're doing it wrong. And I think I just, for whatever reason, we just hit a good moment for that message, for the message of because I think things have just been getting more and more let's there's a right way. Let's all, our children are things to be optimized.
Yeah.
And you have to do the optimas, and even if it's a tiny thing, it could be a tiny amount good for them and it's infinitely bad for you, you should do it because parenting is a sacrificial experience in which everything that you are just disappears into the ether and becomes your baby. And more than, and in these sort of some particular socioeconomic groups, it's not just about your baby, you should be focused on their well-being, but it's about your baby, you should be focused on their achievements. What is the right kind of flashcards to show your infant? You can't show them ones with color, so they can't see color. What's the matter with you? You missed out on that crucial no color window, idiot. And so I think there's I sort of, for whatever reason, people were ready for the message of hey, it's cool, it's fine. There's a lot of different good ways to do this, and you don't need to have people at the playground. If the people at the playground tell you you're doing it wrong, you should just tell them to F off. So I think we just I hit a good. So I actually didn't get that much. I mean, of course, there was some pushback, and on the breastfeeding stuff, I had sort of some I think we dealt with that better than the alcohol stuff. There was a possibility of it going sort of the same direction, and I think that it was a little, the way you talked about it was a little easier. So I got a few people saying, well, what about the microbiome? I don't know anything about the microbiome. It's ridiculous. Everything's in it's microbiome. But mostly it was pretty good. But I've the coronavirus stuff is super interesting. So I've been very, very, very engaged in the coronavirus. I'm doing the coronavirus all day, every day, everything about the coronavirus. And I think it has the same kind of weird misinformation piece, which I've been thinking a lot about how we can, sort of how to fight that. So and about the same kind of idea that like people that understanding is sort of the key to pushing this forward. So, you know, it's sort of like, there's a kind of dichotomy between the people who seem to think that like if someone coughs on their hand and touches a salad box at Whole Foods and 2 hours later you touch the same salad box, basically you're dead. I mean, it's like, that's the approach that's like, and I don't know why, I mean, that's it. And then there are the people who are like, the coronavirus is just the cold. It's good, you know, I mean, I don't want to like shit on JP Ioannidis because I love everything he does, but like some of the messaging there was like maybe could have been a little better thought through.
Sure.
And so I think that there's a somehow if people just understood like, hey, you know, like it's not that you're going to die with the salad box, but you know, it's important to understand that like, yes, if someone just coughed right in their hand and rubbed it on the salad box and you immediately touch it afterwards, you could get something on your, wash your hands before you touch your face. That's fine. You know, and so it's sort of like, we got to figure out, so I've been working on some stuff. I mean, a lot of people working on this. I'm working on some stuff to try to sort of, and some of this is what the newsletter is trying to do. I have a newsletter tomorrow is about immunity to help people understand, like, what is immunity? Like, what does that mean? What does it mean to say that we are both not sure, like that infection, like we are not sure the extent to which antibodies deliver immunity in this case, while also noting that it is very unlikely that there's no immunity. Like that would be very inconsistent with everything we know about how immunity works in viruses.
Do you have a take on do you have a take on like the way Sweden is approaching it?
You know, TBD. I think the question for them is going to be, I think, whether is going to be in the next few weeks, because if they see it start going back down, then I think they will. I mean, you know, there are things
prevailed.
It will seem like a better idea than maybe it would have. I also think it will depend a lot on how quickly, you know, a lot of people are going to, I mean, people are going to die in all these other places as things start to open up. I don't think people's appetite is to keep things closed for this long. And so if what happens is Sweden just saw all its deaths 6 months before Denmark sees all its deaths, then I think they're going to look pretty good.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'm in gallery review right now, and I think I'm just going to go, I'm assuming that everyone has my gallery view. So I'm going to go to Ron. I'm going to go that way.
You said my name. You're like the only person who's ever said
Oh, thank you. Thank you. What do they say usually?
Ran.
Ran.
Yeah.
Like the verb. Hey, Emily. So also a big fan. I actually wrote to you last week, I think, after I read your newsletter. Also a new mom. My first son just turned 3 months, and it's, you can imagine, like, it's already very overwhelming having a newborn, and then dealing with all of this COVID stuff is just like insane. But yeah, we have like a huge cult following over here. I probably have like, I don't know, a new mamas group of 15 or so, and we're all really big fans of you. So we're all just being like, okay, what do we do with COVID and having newborns? So I guess I'll ask the question I wrote to you last week about, which is top of mind for a lot of us working moms is, you know, we'll be going back to work, me personally, in like a month and a half.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how do we think about daycare or childcare or nannies or nanny shares, or how do we sort of think through all of those trade-offs? I know you wrote about it in Crib Sheets, but how do we add in this additional layer of, you know, uncertainty of timing? And risk?
I mean, so I think the first thing is I would say, like, just like there is not an answer to this question.
Totally.
I mean, there's no answer, and so. And, you know, I think making the right choice is going to depend on being realistic about what is going to happen. So, you know, if you send your kid to daycare, or you have a nanny, or you have a nanny share, or actually probably anyway, there is a reasonable chance that your kid is going to get the coronavirus. Just like, I mean, not like you can do things to limit that. You can do things to limit that risk. It's not that there's nothing that one can do. But like the virus seems to be like pretty contagious. And when people start going out and, you know, little kids in daycares, they can't wear masks. They're not going to wash their hands all the time. There's caregiver, you know, it's the same kind of congregate setting. Now, it may be that we will learn as kids go back into schools and daycares that actually kids don't transmit the virus very much. We know that they don't get very sick with it. It's possible they also don't do a lot of transmission. We don't really know. So we may learn that. Somebody the health minister in Switzerland today said that like kids can't transmit the virus. I mean, it seems very implausible. But I guess it could be true. And if it turns out to be true, like daycare seems like a great idea. But I think the thing is that your kid is probably not going to get very sick. So kids are like really pretty unaffected, very, very high asymptomatic rate, very mild infection in general. The issue is they get sick.
So,
So
yeah.
even then, so there's like this one study where people keep asking me about that's like, aren't infants more affected than, yes, infants are more affected than older kids. It's still the case in these Chinese data that like, it's like 94% have like very mild or like infection versus like 97% for the older kids. And another way to see this is like look at the death rates. I mean, I don't want to like don't look at the death rates because don't do that, but like in the last over the course of this epidemic, I think we've seen maybe 3 or 4 deaths for anybody under 14, and in that same time period, maybe like 80 kids died of the flu. So again, this sort of requires acknowledging like sometimes terrible things happen and kids get sick and like really bad things can happen, but it can be easy because we're talking about this all the time to sort of pull obsessively on like one, be like, well, what about that one thing? Like, what if that's why one kid? But you could say the same thing about the flu or about any of the other things that, like you gotta be like careful to sort of keep that in perspective. So the health risks to your kid are pretty limited. The health risks to you may be kind of more real, although if you're probably still fairly small. And but you need to think about like what is your tolerance for that risk, and also like what is the alternative, right? So this isn't it. I think it'd be one thing to say if we said for sure there's going to be a vaccine in August, and your choice is should you send your kid July 1, there's a perfect vaccine August 1. Should you send your kid July 1, or should you wait another month for the perfect vaccine? I think that would be one choice. But actually the choice you face is, are you sending your kid, June 1? There may be a vaccine of some protectiveness in maybe January, or it could be February. Some people said it's going to be September. That seems implausible. So like things are going to evolve, but they're going to evolve slowly. Are you prepared to keep your kid at home till February or January? How do you think about getting a nanny? Like, if the nanny is going to be better than daycare for health, for like viral spread, if the nanny themselves is not like going out and doing a lot of stuff, that's a little hard to monitor. And so, I mean, I think it's just like, there isn't a great sort of thinking through the scenarios and thinking through like what is the alternative? Like, when am I going to have to make this choice? I think the same thing comes with the grandparents, right? Like what, do I not, like, it feels very anxiety provoking to think about seeing my parents now, but like, am I not going to see them till February? Like that also seems really bad. And I think I'm struggling a lot. I think that for us, that's the piece we're really struggling with. We have I will say people have been very judgy about this, but we kept our nanny coming. She doesn't really see a lot of other people. And honestly, hi, there's a baby. And I think it is like, I think if we didn't have her come, her mental health would be awful. It's already pretty bad, but like, it's just like, basically we kind of like brought her, we were like, okay, you're in our pod, and like, now you come and babysit. So I don't know if that's helpful.
No, I think it's just, there's no answer.
There's no answer. No, exactly. I mean, it's like, I could have just stopped and been like, there's no answer. Let me like talk for 5 minutes.
No, everyone's suffering. Everyone on this call is probably a parent. So yeah. Feeling the collective pain. Thank you.
The collective pain.
Also remember that new information comes out all the time. And, a month later, it might look really different. So everything keeps changing.
Yeah.
So thank you, Ron. Best of luck in your decision making. Sarah.
Hi.
Hi.
Yeah, so glad that you could join and do this talk, Emily. This is super exciting. And also, thank you, Brown Club, for putting this on.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Yeah, so I guess my question is somewhat similar to Ron's in the scope of like parents working from home and also dealing with like parenting and potentially working at the same time from home. And so I'm curious, because it sounds like you are obviously very data driven, but also you said yourself that you're a very neurotic parent. And so I'm guessing that you're looking at data currently to maybe inform your parenting decisions right now. And so I'm curious what your take has been when you're trying to work while being stuck at home, and also kind of having to be the parent and the teacher and the caretaker kind of all at the same time. What have you seen like work for you with your kids, or even just some like resources that you found have worked really well?
It's a fucking nightmare. I mean, I don't like it's, so actually this is not something that's super amenable to data. And this has been a sort of general feature of like, as my kids have gotten older, like, you know, there are pieces of, you know, sort of almost more, it's more like decision making than data. Like, you know, we use a lot of the kind of like logistics tools that I use at my job to try to like organize this. And this has been a particularly dark place where we're trying to like, to organize. Our family really likes routine. Like everyone in my family is really obsessive about routine. And so we have like actually a pretty routinized homeschooling situation going on over here. But it's really hard. And I think it's not, it's just not amenable to a lot of data approaches. I don't know, we use a lot of I use a lot of screens, you know, and I've been spending a lot of time thinking about this question of like, are screens bad? And I've decided no, they're not bad. They're fine. A lot of them, great. You know, but I do wonder like I don't think there's really going to be data. We need to wait for the pandemic to be over to do this. But like my kids' facility with screens in both, you know, in sort of bad ways, but also in kind of like good ways are, you know, like my 4-year-old, 5 years, my son just turned 5. And so he got like, we were using Scratch Junior, which is like this iPad thing. It's like iPad coding thing. It's very cool. And then he like got into like Scratch, which is like a learn to code for much older kids, which he can't really do, except now he's like, but his instincts about like where things are going to be are like insane. And, you know, obviously are just that. It's not like he's like some kind of like coding genius. He's just like a person with a lot of exposure to screens. And so he's just like, basically we get on, we like load up the thing. And he's like, and I'm like, okay, well, this card, I have my like little cards. Like, okay, the card says you change the background. It's like I'm going to get on my phone to find out how to change the background, you know? And he's like, oh, it's this button. And he's like, I could just, you just like tell it to be over here. This is the thing. And he's like, I was like, what is this? And so, I don't know, I think we'll sort of see. I think there will be some long-term stuff about the screens, probably not so bad, but I've just been trying to survive. I'm trying to get through it.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Sarah. Susanna?
Hi.
Hi.
So you've written about a lot of great topics in your books. And I wonder, for the topics that you haven't covered that we run across in our lives, how would you recommend going about making these sorts of decisions for ourselves when we don't have access to all of the studies, all the time and the skills to do your analysis?
So, I think it depends a little bit what the kind of question is. So sometimes people write to me with like sort of pretty medically questions, like, you know, I have this sort of particular medical thing. And there I have like one piece of go-to advice, which is that there is a website called Up to Date, which is the like way that doctors learn about things that they don't know, like they need to review. And so I often tell people, like, go to your doctor and ask them to print you out the Up to Date entry on this, because actually like you know, it's like they're a little hard to read, but they're pretty comprehensive. But you know, I think the other version of this, so that's kind of like, I have a medical problem, but that may not be the sort of particular set of things that one wonders about. But you know, then there's a different set of problems, like, you know, should I redshirt my kid? People ask me a question a lot, like, should I hold my kid back from kindergarten? Like, your book stops at the age of 3, and like, I want to know if I should like maybe my kid has a summer birthday, like should they still, like how do I parse that literature? And I think unfortunately that that's kind of a hard question to answer. I think there's some general principles about like what's a good study, what's not a good study. Like randomization is better than observational data, big is better than small, more data better than less, written by economists, always the best. But there isn't like I find it a little hard to describe like how I am doing, like how I think about what is the right data, other than to say like sometimes I can just tell it's not that good. So I don't know. I'm up to date. That's my answer.
Thanks.
All right, thank you. I'm going to jump to Lizzie.
Hiya, I'm Lizzie.
Hi. Hi,
This is
Lizzie.
John. He didn't go to Brown, but we let him here anyways.
All right, that's cool.
Because you married me, and we
Yeah.
have to include
All
him.
right.
We don't have a baby. We'd like to have a baby someday. Soon would be good. We really liked Susanna's question. So we're basically gonna ask the same thing. It's like, we know we should be looking for studies, but we want to make sure we're looking at good studies when we're trying to figure out, trying to avoid going down the rabbit hole, but seeking more information. I think you pretty much answered that question. If you have any other like little tidbits, just sort of like things that you mentioned randomized, which is challenging with, fertility and pregnancy, but
Yep.
this sometimes, and then bigger studies are obviously better.
Yeah, bigger is better, randomized. I mean, you can also usually, the kinds of things that are particularly bad are like one really surprising study. Like, you sort of like, often I am looking for like, what does the body of this literature say? Like, is there a meta-analysis where even if all the studies are not good, like at least you can see how many of them there are. Yeah, and I then sometimes I look at like is this in a good journal? It's not always perfect, but there's a kind of like, if something is published in like the New England Journal of Medicine, that's usually better than if it's published in like Todd's blog journal of blogging.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing is to just be a little careful, and this probably sort of applies to Susanna's question too. Just be a little careful about like how you about correctly framing your question. Like the more specific you can be about what you're asking, the easier it can be to find the evidence. And I think that kind of that applies to some of the questions that are sort of more esoteric also. Like, what actually do you want to get out of this? Like, what is the decision you need to make? Which I think can be helpful for sort of framing how you look at the data and being precise about what you're trying to look for.
Do I have time to ask a follow-up question?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
So, I'm on antidepressants, and I've done a bunch of research around antidepressants, and I have a doctor who's been, I saw a couple of different doctors to find one that was going to work with me in the right way, but it was sort of notably not really something you wrote about. But 10 years after you wrote, I feel like it's much more something that's being talked about a lot more. Do you have you can take this question either route, whichever one you have more information on. One, have you thought about, writing a 10-year later version at some point?
Second edition.
Yeah. And two, do you have any sort of take on like what that's like to sort of have the trends change? And my mindset, I guess what I'm trying to say is I gained a lot about my mindset from your book, which was just like, I'm gonna have to make a lot of decisions as a mom about like me versus this thing. And I can't make the decisions based purely on like optimizing for this thing.
Yeah.
I have to think about myself and my well-being. And I think it really helped us get on the same page too.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I guess anything you want to respond to there.
Yeah. I mean, so I think, so we've sort of like, part of the issue with writing a book like this is that then, yes, things change. And sometimes that thing is like, there's new evidence, but more it's things that are like, so antidepressants actually is something that I've been thinking about. And then there's like pot. That's the other thing I realized.
Yeah, I was going to mention that too, but I already
pot,
felt like
yeah.
I was crossing the
No.
judgment line.
Pot is like, people ask me for this all the time. Pot is like, and so, because it wasn't like, because it wasn't really legal, like anywhere, it was sort of, but now actually the literature has evolved a lot, the data has evolved. And so they actually have, like, we have updated Expecting Better a few times in sort of small ways since it came out, but now, but they've always been really restrictive about how much space I can use. But in my most recent round of negotiations with my publisher, they have now agreed to let me like do everything that I want. So I think January 2021, when we do like the next sort of big release of this, there will be a new edition, which will have pot in it and probably more antidepressants and apparently stuff on skincare, because I didn't cover that because I don't engage in any skincare. But apparently a lot of people do engage in skincare and are interested in learning about their skin. So there's a few other things, but those are like the big, sometimes one has blind spots, and apparently my blind spot is that like I only use moisturizer. People have older children. So all these babies, it's so nice.
Dinosaur babies.
Hello.
Well, thank you.
Hi.
I have a 18-month-old who is a chaos monster that I love dearly. I don't really, all of my questions right now involve a crystal ball. I just feel like we are struggling with whether or not to send him back to childcare. We're struggling with figuring out whether or not we should commute again via public transit. All of our regular normal parenting questions feel easy now.
Yeah, I agree.
But I don't know, you were such a balm to me as a new mom. I felt like it was such a crazy hormonal, like loaded time. It was really nice to have rational, data-driven information. And so it's nice to meet you.
It's nice to meet you.
Toddlerhood is crazy.
It is crazy. It is crazy. I really feel for you. Like, I have to say, like, quarantine, which one thing with like a 5-year-old and a 9-year-old, like, I think you have the hardest.
It is so hard. Both my husband and I have like, really demanding full-time jobs. We're trading back. And we got
yeah. That's what I think about that.
But at the same time, it's so nice to get the time to see him learn all these words and all the things he's doing. Do you want to say hi? Yeah. Thank you so much.
You are very welcome. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Oh, he's so cute. Thank you, Alice. And then we have Liz.
Hey, Emily. I would share my webcam, but I'm very, very pregnant, so cameras aren't my friend right now.
Okay.
So my question is around kind of spousal attachment and bonding. I'm wondering if you'd run around any research around, obviously when my child is born, he'll be very attached to me as I feed him, but I'm wondering, have you done anything or around, how to make sure that, the father or the spouse really feels attached? I feel like people tell me, if the dad doesn't do skin to skin, they're never going to speak 20 years later. It's like, thank you for that anecdote, but do you have any thoughts around that?
So, I mean, I think, the question is like what, you cut out a little bit for me in the middle, like, is just around like how you get your kids to bond under these circumstances where they're not going to be there at the beginning, or just in general?
Yeah, so a little bit of both, right? So I think right now we're facing whether or not the husband can be in the delivery room right after or during. And so, if you've done any research around that.
Yeah. So we don't really have any particular research around that because, and you can sort of see why it would be so difficult to do that, because the sort of circumstances in which someone has a partner or not a partner in the delivery room most of the time are not random. They're like relate to, their like connection with their partner. So my guess is that you would find that people who are not in the delivery room when their kid is born are less attached to their kid, but the causality there is definitely going the other direction. You know, at the same time, like parenting is a long game. And there are a lot of people who bond with their kids, even though they adopt them when they're 9 months old. And so, you know, I think that it is very easy to like forget that in the sort of immediate moment, which isn't to say that like, which is different from saying that this isn't important or this isn't something that like, you know, it is important. And I think it's probably important to you much more than it is important to the sort of like to their bonding. And I don't think you would find any data that would support the idea that, you know, if dad misses like the first 4 days, that has any long-term effect, or even if he misses, you know, a lot of the beginning. I will say for many of us who have like a second kid, you know, my husband was around a lot when Penelope was a baby, and he was around a lot when Finn was a baby, taking care of Penelope. And you know, it is true that it took longer, like that there were sort of periods when Finn was little that he was like much more attached to me, and I don't mean just like physically attached while he was eating, but like just like, you know, he liked me better. We have one really like epic story where I took Penelope trick-or-treating, and Finn was like 6 months old, and Jesse, he just like cried the entire time while I was gone for like an hour. And then also Penelope fell down some stone stairs, and so we agreed and got a big bump on her head, and we agreed when we came back that like we had not made the right allocation of children. But you know, if you're there is not a data-driven reason for your baby to worry about this. And I think that's about all I can say there that would be reassuring.
Thank you. Thank you. That was great. It was fun to hear all those questions and the answers. I have a question for you,
yeah,
Professor Oster. In one of your books, I think in the preface, you were saying that you wished that you could teach a class on economics based on everyday decisions and how the knowledge of economics can really help with that. I personally don't have a strength in understanding economics. I did take one economics class at Brown, which I took pass-fail because I didn't think I could get a good handle on it, and I thought that was a really great decision on my part. But I was wondering how successful you've been in petitioning the university to have you teach a class that's a little more like, you know, arm you with everyday data, and that's how economics can really help as well in other areas.
Yeah, I'm sure the university would be fine with me teaching such a thing. And I thought a lot about what I wanted to teach in this sort of like, because I just stopped teaching this master's class, and so I started teaching this social policy class. And so I actually think a little bit about like, should I do sort of like kind of like how do you use economics, like a version of a microeconomics class, which is like all around examples of how you can like use microeconomics to like make your life better. But instead I just insert that into all of the classes that I actually teach, which goes fine. You know, I think like Brown, like I think that this stuff is so, it is so sort of around, and I almost think it would make it like less helpful if it was like too structured into a class. You know, but there's a way to like, when I do teach opportunity cost in various versions of classes that I teach, to be like, you know, by the way, here's how you can use this to think about, you know, this choice that you're making about going to the Ratty or going to the Blue Room, and you know, what's the next best option. And so I think if you were in my classes, you would like, one would find them sort of like this webinar, like there's a lot of like discussion of my family and stuff, even though we're doing sort of social policy. Like I try to make it very, I try to make it kind of accessible and fun. But I think the university the university is like, has been very supportive in a lot of ways. I think they'd be fine with me teaching kind of whatever.
Oh, I love that. I love that you do that in your classes already.
Yeah, they're fun and it's good.
Lisa, I'm wondering if you had a question.
Yeah, I actually I have two questions, if that's okay. Kind of on a more global scope, not being a parent, but I'm curious about just in terms of negotiating family opinions. You talked a little bit in your book about how your mom insisted that your daughter should wear mittens to protect herself from scratching herself, and that those types of instances where it's really hard to just come to a family member and say, I've read this book, the data suggests that you should kind of approach it this way, and kind of have some kind of eye rolling from somebody who's, from the Dr. Spock generation, et cetera. So I was just wondering how you negotiate, have you had, experiences where you've had to negotiate that type of dyad?
I mean, sure. I think in some ways, the main way I negotiate that is just by like not arguing about, like just like not arguing about, like I have a lot of this interaction with both my mother and to some extent my mother-in-law, where they like have some view, and then I'm like, that's not, I don't think that's right. But sometimes you just have to like kind of let it go. And I think this is a sort of like similar to these people on the playground. Like some of the message in the book is not that when the person on the playground is like, I can't believe that you would, sleep train your kid, or I can't believe you did this. The message isn't that you want to like hand them a little card that's like, well, actually the evidence is this. The message is more like, you'd be like, well, it's a different choice that I made. Like, thanks so much. Like, let's talk about the coronavirus or Donald Trump or, something on which we agree. And, rather than sort of like trying to convince them, I find trying to convince people of things is like, I don't make as much progress as I think, particularly when those people are related to me.
Gotcha. Okay, so just kind of change the subject, perhaps.
Yeah. My mother, like in the same mitten conversation, she was like, "Don't walk up and down the stairs." I was just like, "All right."
Don't walk up and down.
But then I just did it anyway. Like, what are you gonna do? Right. You're like, we have to fight about this. I'm just gonna walk up and down the stairs. What do you do about it?
Okay. Note to self: don't move ever. Okay. Yeah, so my other question is just in terms of, just in terms of the analytics, just around women's health in general. As you were researching these books, was there a study that you were like, damn, why isn't there a study of this? That would have been really helpful to have. Was there something that you really would have liked to have seen that just wasn't there?
Yeah, I mean, there are a billion things like that, but the thing that comes to mind, partly because sometimes I would think, boy, it'd be great to have a study of this, but I can see why it's really hard to do. One thing that comes to mind that I am sort of constantly surprised by is just in the realm of like sort of physical recovery from childbirth, that there isn't more basic data. So like things like, what share of women have like different kinds of tears after childbirth, like vaginal tears? That is an answerable question. It is in medical charts. If you had like access to people's charts from like Epic or, some other like thing, you would just know the answer to that question. And it would be really valuable because this is something that people want to know. So there were a lot of things like that in that space where I was like, I can't believe there isn't a paper that just tells me this number. And I think that that's part of just like sort of lack of focus on this, on actually that particular piece of sort of like postpartum physical and mental health, where people are just not paying as much attention as I think that they should.
Great, thank you.
Emily, I had a question. Have you thought about going kind of further upstream, like, and maybe doing a book on IVF? That's like an area of a lot of kind of open for interpretation, and yet a lot of data as well.
Yeah, I thought about it. I mean, I think part of the issue is like so much of what I write is kind of like has a personal, not all of it, but like has a sort of personal bent, and that is not an experience that I had. And so I think it would have to be a different kind of book. But it is something I've thought about. I've thought about trying to add some things about that in Expecting Better. I know it comes up for a lot of people. I think you're right that like there's a lot of data, there's a lot of conflicting data, and there's like a lot of things that people want to know. It's like a big space with a lot of heterogeneity across providers, and like a lot of complications. So I don't know. It's more like a blog, I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
Yeah. All right. Very cool.
That's a great idea. Yeah.
Okay, wait. Alice chatted her question.
Let's let Alice go.
Okay.
What is your research into early childhood make you think we should do institutionally for parents and young children? I like universal preschool. I mean, I think, one thing is maternity leave policies. Like, we need better versions of those. There's a huge amount of socioeconomic inequality in how, whether people get like any parental leave in the US, if that's like very problematic, something we should be thinking about. In general, I think daycare options are very poor, and or at least complicated. I mean, some places they're easier, some places they're less easy, but it's certainly, like places like New York, you're on the preschool daycare wait list for infinity time to get 2 hours a day of, childcare where you have to be there. I mean, this isn't very helpful. And so, I think that there could be more of that. I think then once you like the logistics, most of you guys seem to have, well, I guess your kids are sort of mixed ages, but like once your kids are in school, then there's like, school ends at 3, like 2:30. What am I supposed to do with my kid? It's like the whole other time of the day. Like my work doesn't end at 2:30. And so I think that's been, I think sort of thinking a little bit about kind of how we help people organize their lives is definitely a big piece of this. But I'm not sure institutionalized childcare. Like, I think that would be fun. We'd have to see.
Thank you. Lizzie, did you have another question?
Yeah. So Emily, in Expecting Better, I really appreciated that you were open in the beginning about being sort of a neurotic person. I am also sort of a neurotic person, sort of being not really the totally right adjective. I'm a pretty neurotic person. And I like who I am and I like my job, and my job is pretty stressful. But also because I just sort of like run on that kind of energy. And so like pre-COVID even, I've had trouble interpreting the advice about stress related to fertility and then hopefully eventually pregnancy. How did you interpret like the sort of trying to be low stress when you were both like trying to get pregnant and then pregnant? To me, just minimizing stress, even in outside of this weird time, I don't know how to interpret that as a like relatively just high-strung person.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that I'm the best person to answer that question because I definitely did not minimize stress. So I don't know. I mean, it's I'm trying to think about like, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think in one thing I will say is I think that literature is pretty focused on like the sort of these, like there are some papers that are like having a lot of stress is like bad for your baby in long term, whatever, but like the papers are pretty focused on like really stressful events, like losing a spouse, like very like significant trauma. Things, not like just like my job is really busy this week. Kind of, so I think one way is to say like trying to, people are like, I'm stressed about that, and then I'm stressed about how I'm stressed, and I'm like getting more stressed about, it's like, maybe just like, it's like, this is kind of not, there isn't anything much in the evidence, and there's anything in the evidence that would suggest that like the kind of regular type of stress that we're like sort of experiencing on a day-to-day is problematic. But I mean, I will say I found getting pregnant, feel for you, like I found the experience of getting pregnant to be really stressful, even though it wasn't actually, it was fine. It like ended up going fine and it didn't take that long, but it was just like really, I was thinking about it all the time, even more so than when I was pregnant. It was like, yeah. So I don't know.
That's helpful. I mean, just like sitting in the well, it's nice. Yeah. Have company.
Lizzie, did you mean de-stressing? Did you mean de-stressing in work or de-stressing in trying to get pregnant?
Both. I just think like when you read anything about fertility, there's like, some basic advice, and it always includes minimizing stress.
Try to relax.
Just like stress less,
I actually thought in Emily's book, Expecting Better, I don't know if you've read it, she makes there's a whole chapter on taking your temperature and charting out when your fertility is. And for me, I feel like it's stressful when you don't feel like you have any control. And just the fact that you're charting your temperature and all these other markers as to when you're most fertile gives you a certain degree of control, which I think could maybe de-stress in regard to that. you know,
I think,
regard to getting pregnant.
no, I guess then to your question, Karen, it was more about like, I mean, obviously, I guess to speak to my neuroses, like I was charting like long before we even started trying. Like if that like speaks to who I am as a person.
Me too.
So that didn't help.
We're the same. It doesn't help that much.
It's just who I am. So like, you know, maybe, I guess, you know, maybe down the line, if we're doing IVF or something, I would consider taking a break from work if it was like really, if, you know, I don't know. There's things I would consider, but mostly just, I haven't found good, anything good on like, what if you're just a stressed out person by nature? Right. And I think what I'm hearing from Emily is just like, you have to just live your life. And the research is about trauma mostly, or big.
Agreed.
Well, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for spending time with us.
Thank you guys.
Sharing
this is really
thoughts
great.
And answering our questions. And I just loved the casual aspect and the whole how this whole thing went. So thank you.
This is great. Thank you guys for organizing, and stay safe, and good luck with all your various choices and decisions.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us, everyone.